No one dared approach the billionaire until a little black girl offered him a lollipop, and what happened next shook an entire system of power. That morning, Maria Thompson, a 28-year-old cleaning woman, had no choice but to bring her 5-year-old daughter, Lily, to work. The daycare had closed due to unpaid fees, and Maria couldn't afford to lose this job cleaning the penthouse of billionaire CEO Richard Langston. But as they walked through the marble hallway of Manhattan's most exclusive building, they were stopped by the building manager, Stephen Granger. "Get this child out of here," he snapped. "People like you don't belong in a $15 million penthouse." Lily held onto her mother's hand, silently watching as her mother was humiliated. What Stephen didn't realize was that Richard Langston himself was standing behind him, observing everything. And just when tension filled the air, Lily took a step forward, held up her candy and said, "Would you like a piece of my lollipop? Mommy says it helps when people are angry." In that innocent moment, something shifted. Richard accepted the candy, a gesture no one had ever seen from the famously cold mogul. But what followed was even more shocking. A private investigation, a storm of revelations about Stephen's years of racist practices, and a complete overhaul of hiring policies, all sparked by a child's act of kindness. Because sometimes, it doesn't take a lawsuit or a protest to spark justice. Sometimes all it takes is a lollipop. It began with silence, and a child's lollipop shattered it all. Maria Thompson never planned to become a symbol of justice. At 28, she was just trying to survive working as a cleaning lady in the penthouse of Richard Langston, the ruthless billionaire who ruled Wall Street. Her days were quiet, exhausting, and often humiliating. The job paid well, double what she'd make elsewhere, but the emotional cost was steep. That morning, Maria had no choice but to bring her 5-year-old daughter Lily to work. The daycare center had shut down after weeks of missed payments, and Maria had no family nearby to help. She hoped Lily could sit quietly in the hallway while she cleaned, unnoticed. But hopes don't survive long in places like this. Stephen Granger, the building manager, spotted them immediately. His voice was sharp and loud. "Get that child out of here now," he barked, pointing an accusing finger at Lily. "This is no place for slum kids. This is a $15 million penthouse." Maria's face flushed. She clutched Lily's hand tighter, trying to steady her voice. "Please, Mr. Granger. She's quiet. She won't be a problem." But Stephen's disdain was sharper than steel. "I don't care. Mr. Langston pays for professional services, not daycare. If I see this again, you're fired." And then, from the far end of the marble hallway, a door opened. Richard Langston, impeccably dressed, icy-eyed, and known for dismantling companies with a single phone call, stepped out silently. He said nothing at first, simply watched. Stephen, oblivious to his presence, kept ranting, but something shifted when Lily stepped forward. She let go of her mother's hand, walked up to the towering billionaire, and gently offered him her colorful lollipop. "Would you like a piece of my lollipop?" she asked. "Mommy says sharing makes people less angry." A silence fell over the hallway. Maria froze. Stephen paled. And Richard Langston, the man, known for being colder than the stocks he traded, looked down at the child and knelt. "Thank you," he said softly, accepting the candy. It wasn't just a gesture, it was a spark. Stephen stammered, trying to cover his tracks. "Mr. Langston, I was just explaining the rules." "What rules?" Richard asked, standing slowly. Stephen tried to explain. "We have standards. People pay high fees to live in a secure, select environment." "Select," Richard repeated. His voice was calm, but lethal. "What exactly do you mean by that?" Stephen hesitated. "Well, sir, people from certain backgrounds don't always fit." Richard's eyes narrowed. "People like them, you mean?" Maria stepped in, trying to defuse the situation. "I'm sorry for the disruption, Mr. Langston. Assure you it won't happen again. But Richard looked at her, then at Lily, still smiling, still holding half her lollipop, and something in him changed. Why should it be a problem? He said. A polite child offering kindness. That's not a threat. It's grace. Stephen, panicking, blurted. These people always find a way to take advantage. Today it's a child. Tomorrow it's her boyfriend or her whole family. The hallway went still. Richard's face hardened. These people? He repeated. Yes. Sir. Stephen muttered. That was the end of his career. Richard invited Maria to continue her work, allowing Lily to stay in the penthouse library with children's books. Then he ordered a private meeting with Stephen. Behind closed doors, the truth poured out. With the help of his executive assistant Marcus Lee, Richard uncovered 5 years of discriminatory hiring and firing patterns, 17 terminations, 14 of which were Black or Latino employees. Dozens of documented cases where Stephen had invented excuses like communication problems or cultural mismatch to remove people he didn't deem fit. They found evidence of wage theft, secret deductions, racist group chats with other property, managers and statements from 11 former employees confirming systemic bias and manipulation. By the time Maria was called into Richard's office, the full picture was clear. She stood beside her daughter as Stephen, now gray-faced and defeated, was forced to hear the truth read aloud. 5 years of abuse, silencing and theft, Richard said. All of it ends today. Stephen was fired on the spot. Criminal charges were filed. A public statement was released. The media called it a reckoning in Manhattan's most exclusive building. And then came something no one expected. Richard turned to Maria. If you're willing, he said, I'd like to promote you to assistant building manager. Your strength, clarity, and dignity are exactly what we need here. Tears welled in her eyes, not of sadness, but relief. Not of fear, but justice. 6 months later, Maria walked those same marble hallways, not as a silent cleaner, but as a respected manager. She had rewritten hiring policies, ensured fair pay, and turned the building into a model of diversity. Lily, now 6, attended one of the city's top private schools, her tuition quietly covered by a community renewal fund Richard had created. She still ran through the lobby with lollipops in her backpack, handing them to doormen and residents alike. And Richard? He had changed too. He smiled more often. He listened. And he never forgot that the girl who offered him a lollipop taught him more about courage than any boardroom ever had. Because sometimes true power isn't in wealth or fear. It's in kindness, in the courage to stand tall, and in the sweetness of a child brave enough to share. It started with silence and ended with justice that echoed through every corner of Manhattan's most powerful tower. Maria Thompson never expected to make history. At 28, she was just a mother trying to survive, holding 2 jobs and raising a 5-year-old daughter on her own in a city that barely blinked when people like her struggled. That morning, when the daycare shut down due to non-payment, Carmen had no choice but to bring her daughter Lily to work, a cleaning shift, in the penthouse suite of billionaire Richard Langston. The hallway was silent as Carmen walked with Lily's small hand in hers. She just wanted to get in and out without trouble. But trouble found them. Stephen Granger, the building's manager, appeared with his usual scowl. His voice cut through the hallway like a blade. Get that child out of here now. This is not a daycare, and people like you don't belong in a $15 million penthouse. Carmen froze. Lily looked up, confused, but calm, clutching a red lollipop she'd been saving. Carmen tried to speak, to explain. Please, Mr. Granger, her school closed and I don't care, Stephen snapped. Mr. Langston didn't pay for this building to become a playground for slum kids. You're on your last warning. But what Stephen didn't realize was that Richard Langston had stepped out of his office, quietly, unnoticed, and stood at the end of the hallway, observing the entire scene. Known for his icy demeanor and $8 billion empire, Richard was feared by CEOs and respected by presidents. But as he watched the scene unfold, something stirred inside him. Lily let go of her mother's hand and walked toward the tall, imposing man. She looked up and extended her lollipop. "Would you like some?" she asked softly. "Mommy says sharing candy helps people be less angry." The hallway went completely still. Stephen turned, and color drained from his face. "Mr. Langston, I was just explaining the building protocols." Richard knelt slightly to Lily's level, surprising everyone. He accepted the candy with a gentleness no one had ever seen from him. "Thank you," he said, his deep voice almost soft. Stephen began to backpedal. "With all due respect, sir, we have standards." "Standards?" Richard cut in. "Or biases?" Stephen faltered. "Sir, we aim to maintain a certain environment for the residents. People expect quality, security, and professionalism." "By excluding mothers and children?" Richard asked. "Or just the ones who look like them?" Carmen, her voice steady but shaking inside, said quietly, "I didn't mean to cause trouble, sir. I'll take Lily and go." But Richard looked at her, truly looked, and shook his head. "Number, you stay. Lily can wait in the library. There are children's books in there." And with that, the dynamic shifted. Stephen's authority began to crumble. Richard invited him into the office for a private talk. But what followed would be no ordinary conversation. Inside, Richard confronted Stephen with 5 years of employee records and inconsistencies. With the help of his trusted assistant Marcus Lee, they had quietly begun an internal audit. Richard had noticed a pattern: promotions going to the same kinds of people, and terminations disproportionately targeting minorities. Now, the numbers confirmed it. * 17 employees fired or pushed out. * 14 were Black or Latino. * fabricated communication issues or vague cultural misfits used as cover. * white employees regularly receiving bonuses and raises. * secret charges, deducted pay, and group messages laced with discriminatory language. Stephen tried to argue. "These are coincidences, sir. I was protecting the standards of the building." Richard stared out the window, his voice low. "You weren't protecting anything. You were building a wall around your own prejudice. And you were doing it under my roof." Moments later, Carmen was called into the office. She entered with Lily, unaware of the storm that had just swept through. Stephen stood pale, silent, cornered. Richard turned to Carmen. "This man," he said, nodding toward Stephen, "built a system designed to keep people like you out. But today, it ends." Then he turned to Stephen with steel in his voice. "You're fired. The authorities have been notified. The media will hear about this today. Your access is revoked immediately." Stephen stammered. "Please, this will ruin my life. I have a family." "So does Carmen," Richard interrupted. "So did every employee you humiliated. You decided who was worthy and who wasn't. And now you'll live with that decision." As security escorted Stephen out, Richard faced Carmen. "You've shown strength, dignity, and professionalism in a place that didn't deserve you. If you're willing, I want to promote you to assistant building manager with full benefits and a salary that reflects your worth." Tears filled Carmen's eyes, but she didn't cry. She stood tall, finally seen, finally validated. Lily tugged on Richard's jacket one last time. "Do you like green apple lollipops? I brought some today." Richard smiled, not with his usual coldness, but with genuine warmth. "Yes," he said, "I think I do." 6 months later, Carmen walked the marble halls with confidence, clipboard in hand, enforcing fair policies and mentoring a diverse new team. The building was no longer a place of quiet exclusion. It was a beacon of transformation. And Richard Langston? He had changed too. The man who once believed in control and reputation above all had learned something from a child's act of kindness. That power without compassion is hollow. Sometimes, it only takes a small hand holding a lollipop to tear down decades of silent injustice. And sometimes, the real revolution begins with candy. It began with a lollipop, but it ended with the collapse of a hidden empire built on prejudice. Richard Langston was known across Manhattan's elite as a titan of industry. Billionaire, strategist, feared negotiator. He wasn't the type to be moved by emotion. But that day, in the quiet of his $15 million penthouse hallway, everything changed because a little black girl offered him candy. Maria Thompson, a 28-year-old cleaning woman, had been working in Richard's apartment for weeks. She was precise, respectful, and never late. But after her daughter's daycare shut down, she had no choice but to bring 5-year-old Lily to work. She prayed no one would notice. Stephen Granger noticed. As building manager, Stephen saw himself as the guardian of standards. When he saw Lily in the hallway with her mother, he exploded. "This is unacceptable," he barked. "This isn't a daycare, and people like you have no business bringing kids here." Maria tried to explain quietly, respectfully. But the words "people like you" landed like stones. Lily clutched her red lollipop and watched in silence. Then, a presence entered the hallway, unseen at first, but undeniable. Richard Langston had been observing the entire scene. Stephen didn't notice until it was too late. The shouting, the humiliation, the veiled racism. But it was Lily who broke the tension. She stepped forward and held out her candy. "Would you like some?" she asked the billionaire. "Mommy says it helps when people are angry." Everyone froze. And for a moment that felt eternal. So did Richard. He knelt down, took the lollipop gently, and nodded. "Thank you." The gesture would be remembered for decades, not because of the candy, but because of what followed. Richard called Stephen into his office. What started as a conversation about professionalism turned into a firestorm. With the help of his longtime assistant Marcus Lee, Richard initiated a discreet internal audit of the building's hiring, promotion, and disciplinary records. Especially under Stephen's management, what they uncovered was staggering. In the past 5 years, 17 employees had been dismissed or reassigned for vague reasons like cultural mismatch or communication problems. 14 of them were Black or Latino. Others who remained had faced unexplained wage deductions, denied promotions, and unbearable working conditions designed to push them out. Marcus brought in folders, charts, and digital records. Everything was documented, painstakingly so. Even private text messages from Stephen to other building managers, referring to getting rid of another one and keeping standards clean, were uncovered. "This isn't just unethical," Marcus said. "It's criminal." Richard sat in silence for a long time. He had built his empire on logic, data, and strategic clarity. But this wasn't business. This was rot quiet, systematic, and festering right in ass, under his nose, and he had allowed it. When Stephen tried to explain himself, offering excuses about the brand and resident expectations, Richard cut him off. "You built a system that excluded people like Maria because you assumed no one would ever look close enough to question it. But I'm looking now." Stephen was fired immediately. Legal action was initiated. Press releases were prepared. And Richard made a decision that shocked everyone in his corporate circle. He called Maria into the office. The hallway was different now. Lily was still in the library, flipping through picture books. Maria walked in unsure, eyes wide with caution. Richard stood by the window, hands in his pockets. "I want you to hear this directly," he said. "Stephen was running a system that targeted people like you. He's gone. And if you're willing, I want you to become our new assistant building manager." Maria's hand went to her chest in disbelief. "You've shown grace in humiliation, professionalism under pressure, and more courage than most executives I know. You don't just belong here. You raise the standard." Tears welled in Maria's eyes, but her voice was steady. "Yes, sir. I'd be honored." 6 months later, The building was unrecognizable, not in luxury, but in spirit. Maria led the new hiring and inclusion policies, ensuring fair practices, equitable treatment, and a support system for working mothers and minority employees. The old fear was gone. Employees smiled in the hallways. Tenants began to notice, not just the shine of the marble, but the warmth of the people maintaining it. Lily, now 6, still visited occasionally. She often ran down the halls with fresh green apple, lollipops in her bag, her favorite flavor, now Richard's too. And Richard, he changed more than anyone imagined. His icy demeanor had softened, not because of guilt, but because of clarity. He had built wealth, but now he was building legacy. When Marcus handed him a report showing a 40% increase in employee satisfaction and the 40% increase in employee satisfaction, lowest turnover in years, Richard smiled. A rare, genuine one. This building, he said, used to be exclusive because of who it kept out. Now, it's excellent, because of who we bring in. One evening, as Richard walked the corridor, he paused outside the library where Lily once sat reading. A plaque now hung there, in honor of Lily Thompson, a lollipop that opened eyes and unlocked change. Because sometimes, all it takes to expose injustice is one small, fearless hand-offering, kindness in the face of cruelty. And sometimes, the most powerful revolution begins with candy. It all started with a lollipop and ended with a revolution no one saw coming. 6 months had passed since Maria Thompson stood trembling in Richard Langston's penthouse office, her daughter Lily by her side, while the truth about Stephen Granger's years, long abuse of power came crashing down. That moment, sparked by a child's innocent act of kindness, marked the beginning of a transformation not only for one building, but for an entire culture that had long gone unchallenged. Today, Maria no longer wore the cleaning uniform that once made her feel invisible. She walked the polished halls of Manhattan's most exclusive luxury residence, with her head held high, a clipboard in hand, and a quiet confidence that turned heads for all the right reasons. As the newly appointed assistant building manager, she had overhauled policies that once favored silence and status over justice and dignity. Residents and staff alike saw the difference. Under her leadership, new hiring protocols brought in qualified, diverse professionals, people who had been locked out of opportunity not because of their ability, but because of their background. She implemented fair wage policies, transparent performance reviews, and regular check-ins that gave every employee a voice. The result? Resident satisfaction soared to an all-time high. Staff turnover dropped by 60%. For the first time, people felt seen, valued, and safe. In the lobby, Lily, now 6, and bursting with the same warmth that once melted a crier. Billionaire's cold shell dashed across the marble floor. "Mom, look, the garden we planted is blooming." Maria smiled. The garden, filled with colorful plants and flowers chosen by Lily, had replaced the sterile flower arrangement that once sat untouched in the main hall. Now, it was a symbol of growth, of new life, after quiet suffering. But while Maria and her daughter thrived, Stephen Granger faced a very different reality. After being fired for cause and publicly exposed for discriminatory practices and embezzlement, Stephen's world collapsed. His once coveted job managing high-end real estate properties was gone. Word spread fast in the industry. No company wanted to be associated with a man whose emails included phrases like, "They don't belong here," and "Keep the standards clean." He lost his job, then his Long Island home. His reputation evaporated. His mortgage defaulted. Lawsuits followed. No one offered him a second chance. And yet, Maria never spoke ill of him publicly. She didn't need to. His downfall spoke for itself. Back at the building, Marcus Lee, the quiet, sharp-witted assistant who had uncovered the discriminatory patterns, handed Richard a report. 17 applicants have requested transfers to work here, Marcus said. Since the policy reforms, we've become the model for inclusive excellence. Richard nodded slowly. Good. Let the world know that this building doesn't just shine on the surface. He watched from his office window as Maria explained check-in procedures to new hires, her tone clear but kind, firm, but never cruel. She led with the same dignity she had shown on the day Stephen tried to strip it away, the same poise she had taught her daughter, even when life gave them every reason to crumble. There's something poetic about it, Marcus added, the man who swore he was upholding standards of excellence, replaced by someone who actually delivered them. Richard smiled, not the cold smirk Wall Street feared, but a genuine smile. Competence, he said, has no color. The only people threatened by fairness are the ones who were never qualified to begin with. Downstairs, Lily ran toward him with green apple lollipops in her hand, the same kind she had offered him that unforgettable day. Uncle Richard, she said, a nickname she had invented on her own. Want a trade? I brought extras. Always, he replied, crouching down to accept it. The child's laughter echoed through the once silent corridors, replacing the tension that had defined them for so long. And for a moment, it felt like the whole building was breathing easier. A reporter from the New York Times later published a full story on the transformation. The headline read, "From Discrimination to Diversity: How One Building Became a Beacon of Change." It chronicled the fall of Stephen Granger and the rise of Maria Thompson. It shared quotes from employees who now felt protected, from residents who saw the human cost of silence, and from experts who said it was a model every luxury property in New York should follow. But to Maria, the most important part wasn't the headlines. It was the quiet victories. Maintenance workers smiling without fear. A new mother feeling safe enough to bring her child to a staff meeting, or her daughter growing up in a place where kindness was celebrated, not punished. As she tucked Lily into bed one night, the girl whispered, "Do you think my lollipop really changed everything?" Maria kissed her forehead and replied, "I think it reminded people what real sweetness looks like and what bitterness hides." Richard Langston, once known only for mergers and markets, had redefined his legacy, not with money, but with morality. He had proved that leadership wasn't about being feared. It was about being accountable, about standing up, even when no one asked you to. And all of it began with a child, brave enough to share. Because in a world trained to ignore the smallest voices, it was Lily's lollipop, not a lawsuit, or a speech, that cracked the foundation of injustice. And from that crack, a whole new future grew. Sometimes, a revolution begins not with a protest or a speech, but with a child offering a lollipop in a marble hallway. That was the case at the Langston Residences, Manhattan's most luxurious building, once ruled by silence, fear, and invisible walls of exclusion. But 6 months after that quiet act of the bruising kindness, the building had transformed into a model of justice, diversity, and human dignity. And at the heart of that transformation stood 3 unlikely heroes: a black single mother, her 5-year-old daughter, and a billionaire who chose to listen. Maria Thompson never dreamed she'd be anything more than the help. At 28, she had spent years cleaning floors for men in suits who never looked her in the eye. But when the daycare closed, and she had to bring her daughter Lily with her to work, just for one day, her world changed forever. She didn't plan to make history. She only hoped her boss, billionaire Richard Langston, wouldn't notice. But someone else did. Stephen Granger, the building's longtime manager, caught Maria and Lily in the hallway. His voice thundered, laced with classism and racism. "Get that child out of here. People like you don't belong in a place like this." Maria froze. Lily, sensing her mother's fear, clutched her lollipop. And in that moment, when Even Maria couldn't find the words to respond. Lily stepped forward and held out the candy. "Would you like some?" she asked the man who ruled the tower. "Mommy says it helps people when they're mad." What she didn't know was that Richard Langston had witnessed the entire exchange. It was the first time in his adult life that Richard had felt still. Not because of money, not because of fear, but because of innocence and injustice. He knelt down, accepted the candy, and in doing so, started a chain of events that would bring down a silent empire of discrimination. That same day, Richard launched a private audit. What began as curiosity became outrage. With the help of his trusted assistant, Marcus Lee, they uncovered 5 years of subtle and systematic abuse. 17 employees terminated. 14 were Black or Latino. Dozens of fake infractions like cultural mismatch and poor communication. Wage deductions applied only to minority employees. Promotions withheld. Benefits denied. And worst of all, a string of private messages where Stephen boasted about cleaning, the building of the wrong image. They had enough evidence to fire Stephen on the spot, press criminal charges, and report the findings to the Department of Housing and the media. But Richard didn't stop there. He didn't just want justice, he wanted transformation. So he called Maria back into his office. With Lily sitting quietly beside her, he looked her in the eye for the first time. Not as a cleaner, not as someone beneath the system, but as someone who had held it together better than anyone he'd ever known. "If you're willing," he said, "I'd like you to be our new assistant building manager. You've earned far more than the world's given you, and I want to change that, starting now." Maria accepted, though her hands trembled. Not from fear, from hope. Now, half a year later, Maria walked those same hallways in a tailored navy suit, clipboard in hand, overseeing staff, managing schedules, and implementing reforms that had ripple effects far beyond the building. Her leadership style wasn't loud, but it was unshakable. She introduced inclusive hiring panels, mentorship programs, and bilingual training materials. For the first time, janitors, doormen, and maintenance workers felt like they belonged. Resident satisfaction hit record highs. Employee retention improved dramatically. Media outlets called the Langston the new face of luxury, where equity meets excellence. Lily, now 6, was attending one of the city's best private schools. Her tuition quietly paid through a scholarship fund Richard had created in her name. But she hadn't changed much. She still ran down the marble hallways with her backpack full of green apple lollipops, offering them to staff, residents, and guests alike. "Uncle Richard," she said one day, running into his office with a grin, "I saved you the biggest one today." Richard, once feared for his cold efficiency, now smiled more easily. He accepted the candy and said what had become his favorite phrase, "Always." Meanwhile, Stephen Granger faced the consequences of his legacy. After being fired and exposed, he was sued for discrimination, wage theft, and emotional damages. His name circulated across real estate forums as a cautionary tale. The house he once bragged about in Long Island was foreclosed. His contacts dried up. Even those who once echoed his views distanced themselves. He applied for work dozens of times. No one called back. When a reporter asked Maria what she thought of his downfall, she simply replied, "I don't celebrate another person's fall. I just rise and take others with me." In the building's lobby, a new plaque was unveiled in honor of Maria Thompson, whose kindness uncovered truth and whose lollipop changed everything. Tourists began stopping by just to take photos of the garden Lily helped design. Former staff members who had once been pushed out came to visit, amazed at the difference. Some even reapplied and were rehired. One of them, Eduardo Ramos, now the building's head of maintenance, said, "I used to mop these floors while being told I didn't fit the image. Now I help lead this place." That's what real justice looks like. Richard watched it all from his office window. He had built empires with numbers, deals, and fear. But this was something else. Entirely. This was legacy. Not of power, but of people. He once believed that strength came from control. Now he understood it came from compassion. And to think. It all began with a lollipop. A moment of pure, innocent humanity that shattered decades of quiet cruelty. One little girl, one tired mother, and one man brave enough to stop pretending he didn't see. The Langston residences would never be the same, and neither would the world they inspired. Who would have thought that a simple lollipop offered by a child could expose years of hidden injustice? It began in silence. Maria Thompson, a hard-working black single mother, was humiliated in front of her 5-year-old daughter Lily by a building manager who believed people like them didn't belong in a luxury penthouse. But instead of crying or fighting back, Lily walked up to Doe, the most powerful man in the building, billionaire Richard Langston, and offered him her lollipop. Mommy says sharing candy helps people be less angry. That small act of innocence cracked something deep inside Richard. It wasn't just the kindness. It was the stark contrast to the cruelty he'd just witnessed. From that moment, everything changed. A private investigation revealed 5 years of discrimination, stolen wages, and silent sabotage, orchestrated by a man who thought no one would ever question him. In the end, justice wasn't delivered through fury, but through dignity, truth, and a child's sweetness. Stephen was removed. Maria was promoted. The entire building transformed. And it all started with a lollipop. Never underestimate the quiet power of kindness. Sometimes, the smallest gesture, a smile, a helping hand, a child's candy can expose what's broken and begin to heal what we thought was beyond repair. True justice often begins not with loud voices, but with brave hearts. If this story moved you, leave a comment below. What's the smallest act of kindness that changed your life? And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that prove when dignity stands tall, no injustice can stand forever.